am Janice Mathis. I am Executive Director of the National Council of Negro Women. Thank you. I brought my cheering squad with me.
That's right.
In the room, scattered about, are members of the National Council of Negro Women based here in New York. If you would just wave your hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. NCNW has perhaps more than 1,000 members right here in New York. We're an organization, a lot of folk in Washington, can tell you what the policy ought to be. Most of them don't have troops on the ground to tell you what is actually going on in their communities. So I'm very grateful for the support and glad to be a part of the National Council of Negro Women. Now, you've already heard Dr. Janetta Cole. Wasn't that amazing? And that plantation still exists. She didn't tell you the whole story. It has been magnificently preserved so that you can see the living quarters and her ancestors' home, a magnificent structure that still stands today, perfectly preserved for you to go and investigate and see what it's like. Thank you, Dr. Cole, for sharing your life story with us. Mm-hmm. Today, we are so fortunate to have a 21st century Renaissance man, a financial wizard, and a media guru to be our panelists today. Now, unfortunately, they're all men, but we're going to forgive them for that. We have with us today the incomparable, and he has a scheduling problem, so we're going to get him up on his feet pretty quick and let him share with us as only he can. Marc Morial, when I say 21st century Renaissance man, who else could be mayor, lawyer, legislator, entrepreneur, and leader of one of the nation's premier civil rights organizations, all, and make it look easy. So we're delighted to have him with us today. Our theme today is wealth gap. And I will tell you, I have some discombobulation about the whole concept. You heard our eloquent speakers talk about 400 years of history, 400 years of deprivation, 400 years of exclusion, 400 years of disparate treatment. How you catch up after 400 years? And I would submit that maybe that might not even be the right question. It's not so much about defining ourselves by what others are doing as it is, what do we want? We want stability, don't we? We want economic viability. We want communities that we control. I'm not so much, they sent me to go to school with white folk when I was about 11 years old. And I knew that my job was to teach white folk that black children could learn anything they could teach. At 11. So I gave up then about measuring myself against what? After I kicked all their behinds in Greenville, South Carolina, I was ready to go on from there. And answer that question, didn't have to answer that question anymore. So I'm not going to measure myself by, anyway, let me stop and get Marc Morial up here so that he can talk to us about wealth disparity. The National Urban League is known for helping folk build skills, build ability, build businesses. He's been a builder throughout his tenure at the National Urban League, and they are all over the country. And Marc, you can almost tell those urban leaguers, you can just about look at them and tell they must be with the Urban League because they have that certain kind of spit and polish. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Marc Morial.
Thank you. Good morning, brothers and sisters.
Good morning.
It is always an honor to be back with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Thank you, Reverend. Back with Reverend Jackson, back in his New York activation, which 20 years ago plus was founded as the Wall Street Project. And Reverend Jackson does deserve an applause. And I had the distinct pleasure of being with Reverend Jackson. My only visit to Rainbow Windows of the World, which was at the very top of the World Trade Centers before they were destroyed by terrorism in 2001. But I also want to note that this year is also the 35th anniversary of Reverend Jackson's first run for president of the United States. An important foundational campaign for progressive politics, rainbow politics, and African American political empowerment in 1984. It was my first opportunity to run for and win elected office. When at 25 or 26, I became a Jesse Jackson delegate to the Democratic Convention in San Francisco. I was very proud that when Jesse Jackson emerged as a serious, viable candidate, the white Democrats in Louisiana had a fit. They called a special session of the legislature and canceled the Louisiana primary. And a group of us young civil rights wannabe lawyers, I was less than a year out of law school, decided to bring a challenge to that cancellation under Section 5, Barbara, of the Voting Rights Act, and challenged the cancellation of that primary, and the Justice Department ruled in our favor. The primary was reinstated, and Jesse Jackson won the Louisiana primary in 1984. But to talk about the wealth gap very quickly, I want to put some historical context in front of you. First of all, 10 years ago and 30 days ago, 10 plus about 30 days ago, on the Mall in Washington, D.C., on a cold day, but a bright and sunshiny day, Barack Obama raised his hand and was inaugurated as President of the United States. 390 years earlier, in 1619, in the area of Hampton, Virginia, 20 Africans who were on a Dutch ship landed in Hampton, and thus it was the beginning of the system of American slavery. Those Africans who were brought here believed that they were being brought here as indentured servants, and that if they worked for a few years, they would achieve their freedom. That understanding was reneged on, and they became slaves on North American soil, as did their children and their children's children and their children's 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 children for 250 years. Now, history is deficient in that when those 20 Africans landed on the North American soil, they were not the first Africans to land on North American soil. Africans had been consistently a part of almost every expedition undertaken by Spanish conquistadors, including Ponce de Leon. The historians tell us that even Columbus had a man of color captaining one of the three ships. Africans had been part of every single Spanish expedition prior to 1619, and slavery, by the time 1619 came, was alive and well as a system in both the Caribbean and in South America. 250 years later, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But one of the most important things that was proposed as a part of the post-Reconstruction rebuilding effort by Lincoln never came to pass. In 1862, the Congress passed a bill creating for anyone who was white the opportunity to get free land in the western states. All they had to do was show up and decide to live on the land and farm the land, and the land was theirs. Lincoln proposed a companion piece of legislation, often referred to as the 40 acres and a mule legislation, which never saw the light of day after his assassination because he was followed by Andrew Johnson, who was a racist president. The beginnings of the wealth gap in this country, at the very moment of freedom for African Americans from slavery, was that at the very beginning, the playing field wasn't level. White Americans had access to land through the homesteading bill. White Americans did. African Americans had no opportunity for the same. And institutions that had been put in place, like the Freedmen's Bank, didn't last very long. Fast forward to the 1920s and the 1930s, when the federal government began to introduce itself into home ownership through the founding of the FHA. The word redlining came from the official policy of the government at that time, where they put maps together for every community, and they drew a red line around neighborhoods where the government could not back loans. The point I'm making is that the wealth gap was sanctioned by law, supported by public policy, undertaken by the government and politicians. So when one asks, why should the government be involved in any effort to level the playing field and to close the wealth gap, is because the government helped create it. The government enabled it, started it, and sanctioned it. Today, we face an incredible challenge when it comes to the racial wealth gap in America. And that is because the recession, the Great Recession, cost us 40 years of progress when it came to black home ownership. Black home ownership in the middle 1970s was around 40 or 41%. When it crept and came up, Reverend, to around 2006 or so, we were just shy of 50%. Today, our numbers are down to 40 to 41% and predicted to even go lower. This challenge of wealth is, in many respects, the most important element of the unfinished business of the movement for civil rights. Reverend Jackson, in his earliest days of activism, as you know, but it bears worth repeating, became the leader of the economic arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, known at that time as Operation Breadbasket. And Operation Breadbasket became, when Reverend Jackson moved and took up residence in Chicago, the beginnings of people united to save humanity, which was Operation Push. Our work when it comes to closing the wealth gap is the most important work that we need to do. It is difficult because the racial wealth gap is persistent. It is locked in like barnacles. It's locked in like these wild-growing vines you see down south that can take over a tree or take over a bush or take over a building. It's hard to decouple from this. But it is so crucial because the backdrop is that the American economy has tripled in size, hear me now, since 1990. Tripled in size, and it's 4 times as big as the economy when Ronald Reagan was president. Approaching nearly 18 to 19 trillion in gross domestic product. Black people represent approximately in spending power 1.5 trillion of spending power. When you add Latinos and Asians together, the communities of color represent almost 5 trillion in spending power, or approximately 1/4 of the American economy. Let me give you an interesting piece to compare that with, not to get bogged down in numbers. The African American spending power in this country is equivalent to the entire GDP of the Russian Federation. The entire GDP of the Russian Federation, for all the shucking and bluffing and woofing that Vladimir Putin does, is equivalent to the economy of Black America. So we are not without assets. We're not without resources. We're not without spending power. We're not without investing power. We are not without the power to impact what is occurring. I want to, and I know the other people on this panel are going to fill in important gaps about size, and also a discussion that I think we need to have about important levels of strategy that we need to undertake. I want to highlight a few important things that also raise what I call ringing bells, fire alarms, yellow lights. And that is the challenge that we face with gentrification sweeping our urban communities. And how we need to understand that on this issue, we need our activism and our elected officials to stand up and say we want new development, but we don't want and we will not be removed from our historic communities. And we have to recognize that this is an issue that we've got to get our hands around and that we've got to educate, because our elected officials, when we vote and we elect people to office, whether they're African Americans or whether they're other folk that we help get elected, we want responsiveness not just in word, we want responsiveness in deed. But sometimes responsiveness in deed means we have to advance the public policy solutions we want them to vote for, support, and undertake, Ron. Sometimes you got to write the script and give the script to the people who serve in public office and say, here's the script. So we want to recognize Ron Daniels, and we're working with Ron and the Institute of the Black World on a conference in April in Newark, which I know Ron's going to talk about through this conference, which is going to further deal with the racial wealth gap in the context of gentrification. The Urban League movement works on this issue on multiple fronts. Our core work is helping people build jobs and income, helping entrepreneurs, and trying to advance public policies that are going to try to eradicate and erase. This problem is persistent. This problem is difficult. But this is the most important unfinished work of our movement. That is leveling the economic playing field in this country so that prosperity can be shared across the board. I'm going to close with something that I've got to say. You know, the systems of slavery and segregation in this country were based on psychological manipulation. And that manipulation was to manipulate black people into believing that we were inferior. And to convince white people that they were superior and that we were inferior, and to convince us that we were inferior and white people were superior. It was a psychological game of manipulation designed to create confusion and also a hierarchy around American society that now we have to undo in this country. But why I raise it is because I've been following very closely the efforts around the country that began really anew after the Supreme Court disabled Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and the Shelby decision to take a tool away from us. And it opened the floodgates for voter suppression in state after state after state across the land. But let me tell you where else voter suppression is being played out with fervor. It's being played out in the arena of foreign interference in American elections. The Senate Intelligence Committee report documents and underscores the following: that when the Russians decided to get involved in the 2016 election, that their number one strategy and their most important tactics were to manipulate the racial divisions in the United States. So what did the Russians do? They decided that they were going to set up their own Black Lives Matter Instagram page, which they did. They recruited with that Instagram page 300,000 followers. They spent millions of dollars on research, graphics, memes, and message development. And they used that handle to tell our community that voting was a waste of time, that all politicians were sellouts, that their vote did not count. And by the way, if you think you just got to vote, you might as well vote for Jill Stein. Persistent, organized, and manipulative, and another chapter in psychological warfare, Reverend Jackson. Then on the other hand, they went and created these nationalist websites and Instagram pages and Facebook accounts to talk to far right-wing Americans and give them another set of messages, and then set up attacking between the fake Black Lives Matter Instagram community and the right-wing community. The whole thing was the Wizard of Oz. Man behind the curtain over here, same man behind the curtain over there, stirring up confusion with great effectiveness and success. Now, what is going on today? You may have seen this effort to divide the black community between ADOS, African descendants of slaves, and black people who may be here from the Caribbean or Africa. Beware that the same people are doing this. The same people are now undertaking a pernicious effort as though there was no slavery in the Caribbean. As though people who lived in West Africa were not under the yoke of colonialism. But the same people, I suspect, and my instincts tell me, are up to a new chapter, Barbara Arnwine, in trying to divide us. We're trying to create a distinction between, quote, those of us who can trace our family roots back to slavery here in the United States and everyone else, Dr. Janetta Cole. And we have to be, we got to get it some sunshine on the fact that the internet is being used as a tool of manipulation. Well-funded, highly financed. It's a long day away from those campaigns I was involved in the 1970s and the 80s and the 90s, where you just put out these flyers or you got on a talk radio and start talking some trash and starting some rumors, to what is being done now. But again, it is consistent with an effort. We need to maximize our political power if we are going to address the racial wealth gap. If our political impact and influence is diluted because we are divided based on phony distinctions, because we are tricked into not participating, then our ability to impact public policy, our ability to change laws, our ability to make a difference is going to be eroded. See, there's a sinister motive to divide, conquer, suppress, and depress. And we've got to be cognizant of this, and that we are going to see this in lots of places in 2019 and 20. See, not only what are the Russians are doing in the United States, what they did in Eastern Europe for 50 years. They're doing in the United States what many foreign actors sought to do in Africa in the post-colonial, neo-colonial era. We've got to understand this, and we have to talk about it, and we've got to say, beware of these efforts at division. They're fake, they're phony, and they're pernicious. And when you see it, I want you to know, caveat emptor, buyer beware. Be suspicious of all these clever hashtags, because it might not be what it seems. So I just want to close by tying these two things together. Our ability to impact the racial wealth gap depends on our ability to exercise and maximize our political power. Because the racial wealth gap has as in its roots public policy decisions which cut us out of land, business opportunities, and home ownership. And we can't reverse that without reversing policies and reversing laws. It's not possible to do. All of the things we talk about, being more responsible about savings, yeah, that's good. That's not going to change the racial wealth gap. It might make things more tolerable and allow us to have more money on the margins. Understanding how to invest, that's important. But that alone is not going to change the racial wealth gap. We have to do that. I don't dismiss those things. But you can't sell me that all I got to do is save just a little bit more of $9.25 an hour. And I can afford a Tesla or a Bentley or own a big apartment someplace in New York. So, Reverend Jackson, again, we owe you a great debt of gratitude for your leadership and also for the way in which you've paved on economic issues, and I want to salute you, and I love you. God bless you.
Observation, Marc, before you leave. We really kick off with our reception, Marc. Just 1 second, Jonah. Tonight, I wanted to have a session today where a relatively few of us came together to have another an information session. What Marc just said today, the 55 black congressmen need to hear that. If we got more and more and no less and less, we'll get less and less. And so Reverend Sharpton will be here in a little while, and from NAACP, Derek will be here, and Barbara's here from Transformative Justice, and Janetta and Janice here from the National Council. We intend to try to have a kind of family meeting this morning. This is not, we have a reception tonight, interviewing somebody from Microsoft or something. Then we do a little hop and skip, and tomorrow morning we do another. But I want to have a kind of leadership family meeting today. Ron Walters, Ron Daniels is in the thick of this stuff. Now let me make this last point, y'all. Having these meetings costs. I was blessed by the Lord to go to jail in 1960, 57 years ago. Blessed me to be a long distance runner. But y'all, this is an expensive battle, and I need not have to bear this cross alone. Morial has put up $5,000. I want to thank him for that. Ron, thank you, Marc. Because we need help. Getting the hotel space here is not automatic, y'all. So those who will help us, you should have near you some rumble push envelopes. Please fill them out. Now, we need money to sustain. Some of y'all can give $1,000, some give $500, some give $100. We need money to sustain this because we don't have any government grants. We don't want the government grants because of the nature of the way we function. We need you to sustain our struggle to protect this integrity. So please do that. Marc, we thank you so much for this information. Give Marc another hand.
Thank you very much. I do want to acknowledge Melanie Campbell, who is the longtime president of the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation, the Black Women's Roundtable, our sister. And I'm just excited that we have so many sisters in leadership, certainly Janice and Barbara, people like Cheryl and Ifill and Kristen Clark, lots of sisters in leadership positions in civil rights today. And I just want to thank all of them because they're bringing fire, they're bringing intelligence, and they're standing alongside of us. We all stand together. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. It's always good to be in your presence. I want to just quickly reiterate a couple of things that you said. One was that this has got to be, among other things, a political struggle. The systems that oppress folk and create wealth gaps are not primarily economic systems. They are primarily systems of racial superiority and discrimination and exclusion. That's one thing. And so what he said about if we're going to defeat these wealth gaps, we will do it by using the power of our votes, because these systems are entrenched like barnacles onto capitalism that needs to be moderated by democratic principles and ideals. We want to go now after the picture taking. Looks good over there. You know, I think some of these events ought to have like little picture taking, socializing sessions built into them, because people want to see you. We don't get to see each other all that much. But we've got some bona fide experts here, and we want to spend a little bit of time talking with them about what solutions. We know where it came from. It came from our history.
That's right.
We know the effect that it has on us. But let's spend some time now thinking about what some of the solutions are. There's some sort of false blame the victim kind of explanations for the wealth gap. We don't save enough. We buy too many sneakers. We like to shop. We don't own enough homes. But unless you straighten out the systems that govern our country, you're not going to have much impact. So let's go to Edmond, who is all things Black enterprise. I can't remember your fancy title. Let's see, what is it?
You don't have to. I don't need a title.
Well, I call you our media guru.
I'll take it.
Okay? Took Black enterprise from a print edition to a digital edition without missing a step. A lot of big organizations are struggling with that because print is sort of going the way of the dinosaur. But he ushered Black enterprise into the digital age, and for that we're very grateful. Please welcome Edmond.
Everybody. Thank you. So I'm sure we're gonna have some questions that we'll both get to address, but I just want to say that there's three things I want to say to kind of start off the conversation. One, we didn't create the wealth gap, so that's why we can't close it. We didn't create it. It was imposed upon us, and you heard a lot already about how that happened historically. So it's not about that. That goes to the two things I always tell people. So what can you do? If you can't single-handedly close the wealth gap, and you can't, that's not the way it works. What can you do? What should you be doing? The two single things that we must make part of our cultural reality in America as people of African descent is, one, spend less than you make. Whatever you make, spend less than you make, and bank the difference. And I emphasize the banking the difference part. You know, I tell people talk to me, oh, I went to the store and I was going to spend $100, but I found it on sale for $75. And then the first question I asked them, what'd you do with the other $25? If you spent it, you defeated the purpose. So we have to get used to spending less than we make and banking the difference. I don't even care what you do with the bank difference yet. We can talk about whether you should invest it in the business, buy a home, but we have to get into a situation where we are incrementally and steadily accumulating assets in the form of savings. And right now, when we make more money, we spend more money versus we saved money and maintained a consistent lifestyle that will allow us to save money consistently. So we must make spending less than we make and banking the difference a mantra in our communities. The second thing, and I wish someone had told this to me when I was in my 20s, the only reason to use debt is to make more money. Not to buy you a new suit, not to get you some new shoes, and I'm talking about credit card debt and other debt. Debt is only good if it's going to help you. You're going to take that resource to make more money. And that could be going to college, that could be a student loan, but have a plan for how taking on this much of a student loan burden is going to help me to slingshot to that kind of earning power going forward. Not just going to college for the sake of going to college with no rhyme or reason, or going to an expensive school because it's prestigious versus it's going to get you to earning power down the road. So we can get used to only use credit and debt to make money and save, bank our savings and spend less than we make. Those are the two single things that we can do. Everything else is I mean, investing in businesses and investing in stocks and bonds, none of that happens if you have no money. If you literally spent every penny you've made, you're not going to save, you're not going to tithe, that's important to you. All the things we say we should do with our money doesn't happen if we are constantly in debt because we're using debt for ill purposes and we're not banking and saving money. And so I'll start with that.
Okay.
Well, our final illustrious panelist has come up with solutions that are quite innovative and successful. Eugene Mitchell, I met him when he was at New York Life Insurance Company, and he had a $50 billion plan for how to create wealth in our communities. And he's going to tell you now how that plan actually was achieved. And he's now consulting out on his own and is available after this session for one-on-one consultation.
Great.
Eugene,
Thank you so much.
please welcome him.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and to be a part of this conversation. I have some other ideas around what we can do in the way of creating generational wealth and an income stream for our community. And thank you, Janice, for all the years that we've worked together here. 15 years that we sponsored from New York Life.
That's right.
At my direction, and we created a scholarship in the name of Cirillo McSween, the first black agent
And they're
at New
still
York Life.
giving it.
And we're still giving it. That's correct. Let me just give you a little quick background about myself. I'm now the CEO and president of E. Mitchell Enterprises and the author of the new book, The 7 Untold Rules for Creating Black Wealth. Over the last 17 years, I've been a corporate executive, leading over 1,500 African-American financial advisors around the country. And prior to that, I was a prison guard for 4 years down in Miami. And I share these two experiences because from that time there, I've become an extremely passionate advocate for wealth building and legacy creation in the black community. The greatest professional achievement that I've achieved, and now it's gone on that I've been called the man with the $50 billion plan, is the initiative that I created and completed after 7 years at New York Life, leading those 1,500 African-American agents, where we built $50 billion of wealth for the black community, for black families, using life insurance as the foundational asset. The idea on top of that, thank you, brother. Just as equally important for us was that there was a proper financial plan in place for every family so that that money, that wealth, would be sustainable and generational. What I see and know is the opportunity here, so let me give you the formula that we went by, was to get 200,000 African Americans to see the value of owning at least $250,000 of life insurance. See, I know in the questions we're going to talk about some of the things that, we talk about the ill intent or the bad spending habits or the mishaps of our community. I think a big part is things that we don't know, things that we've not been shown, that the hidden secrets that other folks are using and doing with their money, those with wealth are doing that we have not been shown. Things like life insurance, typically in our community, have only been about a $5,000 policy, just enough to cover the cost of the funeral. That was sold to us years ago. Big Mama had that policy. The debit agent came around to collect every week.
Yep.
The penny policy, right.
Yep.
And the idea was that it was very different in other communities when I sat at New York Life. That the Chinese, the Indians, the Jewish community, the white community are not buying $5,000 policies. They're buying $500,000 policies. So that when somebody passes, and just to let you know, we don't get out of life alive. So when we do pass, we live and we die, but they've prepared and set themselves up differently. Where in our community, we're still passing the plate. We're begging to bury on top of that $5,000 policy to put somebody in the ground. They're talking about the opportunity now to use the $500,000 to use as the down payment for that brownstone in Brooklyn. Right? So we're not going to save 20% down on the $1 million brownstone, but from that $500,000 policy that came in, we can use that now as the down payment. So when you think about gentrification, part of it is fighting and fighting the laws and making sure that we are able to keep it for ourselves. But I think we have to also play in the game like the other folks are doing. What else could we do with that $500,000 policy? We could pay for that college education, right? Tax-free. We can give startup capital for new businesses from that. All things that create more opportunities and more wealth. These are things that I've seen other communities doing. That's what this whole initiative of the 50 billion was about. That the agents, after 7 years, as people passed, got to deliver checks back. We had these amazing meetings where agents came up and talked about delivering $1 million check on what was just a few $100s a month in some cases. The cost of a cable bill, the cost of your cell phone bill. But the idea of being proper financial planning for a family. Delivered $1 million as the wife grieved and the family grieved. To talk about what the opportunity is of that for our community. And then from that $1 million, we can start to build out on those other organizations, depositing that back into the black bank so that they can make loans, right? That we can use that money and seek the assistance of the Black Chamber of Commerce. That we can now go to the realtors, the black mortgage brokers, to use them for our loans. I think there are all ways that we can create wealth today. We can create a new income stream that will be the funding way and the stream of new income that we can use to create change in our community. So all right, appreciate it.
Well, one of the things I hope is that we make this a little bit of a conversation. So we do have a few questions I'd like to pose to both of our panelists who are here with us and so able. And then we'll open it up for a few questions from you. You've already talked, Eugene, about one of the solutions that is most likely to work, the investing in life insurance. Are there others? And are we asking ourselves the right questions? I moved recently from Atlanta to Washington. And now I'm living near the mighty PG County, the wealthiest county for African Americans in the country and thus in the world. What is it that makes counties like DeKalb and PG appear to have blacks who are thriving economically? What is it that distinguishes them, and how can we replicate that?
Well, first, I want us to have a ground floor definition of what thriving economically is.
What that means?
Well said.
Because there's lifestyle,
That's
there's looking rich,
yes,
and there's being wealthy.
that's right.
And it's not just black people, and I want to make this clear. We're no worse at managing our money or spending our money than anybody else. So this is not about inferiority or superiority. White people don't have a secret way that they're spending their money differently than we are. Those at the top are doing it differently. Those of us below the top are doing it the same way regardless of race for the most part. So let me set that apart. But one of the things that I stress with my children and I stress with the people that I mentor is that there's a yardstick for how you measure wealth. It's called net worth. It's what you own minus what you owe. And when you do that math, whatever's left, either in the negative or in the positive, that's your net worth. A lot of people who look rich, including in so-called rich counties, including in rich professions, and athletes and entertainers are the most obvious ones, are living very wealthy lifestyles, but they're not rich. So it's important before we answer that question about the PG counties, and every city has a county or an area like that with black people who are doing relatively well off. The thing you got to realize is that it's not necessarily the location that is the cause of the wealth. It's that people of a certain wealth level will gravitate to a certain location. Right. So if I make it and I live in the Maryland, D.C., VA area, and I'm African American, and I want to be in a place that has the services and the amenities that I expect at my level of income, but I also want to be around people who are, well, I don't get stopped in when I'm driving my car home because there's enough other black people to be comfortable.
Right.
Guess where I'm going to gravitate to? I'm going to gravitate to PG County.
right.
So I don't want us to get too caught up in, I'm living in PG County, so I'm doing better, because some people in PG County are struggling. They just look good doing it. And America in general, and this is why we're so attracted to foreign countries, we know how to look good struggling. We know how to project, whether it's on Instagram or in real life, that we're balling when we're not. But net worth doesn't lie. A lot of people won't tell you their net worth. A lot of people are scared to even figure it out for themselves, because it's going to tell a different story than the car they have in their garage, or the neighborhood they live in, or the labels on their clothes. And I'm not even going to get into the Gucci blackface thing, because that gets into a whole nother issue of how we try to validate ourselves by looking a certain way when we're not really managing our resources in a way that will give us the result that we really want.
Well, thank you for that. I would say, though, and push back on you just a little bit, one thing that in that area of DC, and I'm not talking about just PG County per se, but where you have stable, transparently available federal employment, where there are more rights. I come from down south where unions are anathema and systems to prevent discrimination are almost non-existent. When you get more legal protection for your work status and your job, where you can count on benefits after putting in 20 years into a career, there is a better opportunity, I think, because of that stable employment base that is relatively free of the most pernicious kinds of discrimination, to create the kind of net worth that may not exist in other places.
That's absolutely true. I mean, that's absolutely true.
And so when
But
you
I'm
see the
saying-
government shut down because somebody thinks, well, the government doesn't do anything right anyway, and all those folk who work for the government don't vote for me anyway, and so I shut it down for 6 weeks or so, that's sending us a political as well as an economic message, I would submit.
I agree with that as well. But what I want to say is that it is true you have a certain amount of stability if you work in the federal government.
Yes.
Just like it's true that if you can excel as an athlete, you're going to make more money. Or it's true that if you're a technological whiz and you can get a job in the technology industry, you're going to make more money. So there's always going to be different industries, areas that, yes, you can make more money, but we all can't work for the federal government. We all can't play in the NFL or NBA. We all can't, or necessarily don't want to. So while it's important to recognize there are certain industries and professions that will put you in a better position to create wealth, my goal and my mission as a longtime editor at Black Enterprise is you should be able to create wealth in a fair, if the society was fair, even if you decided you just want to be a painter or a plumber, that if you know how to manage your money well and you're being treated fairly by the economy, you should be able, and there are examples, there are people whose parents were plumbers and they've gone on to become CEOs.
Let's go back to the communities that many of us grew up in, where Gigi's family, if she'll pardon me for being personal, ran the cab company. And they were one of the most affluent, financially stable families in the community. The painter lived next door, the plumber lived up the street, the carpenter lived down the street, the auto mechanic lived down the street, the women taught school, and the men had trade. And it was a very stable kind of economic society that was created as a result of that. Now, I'm not talking about wealth creation necessarily, but we're talking about economic viability.
Well, my thing is, if economic viability doesn't lead to wealth creation, then there's no wealth creation. And let me give you a really stark example. And let's take an unemployed white guy and an unemployed black guy, like a chronically unemployed. They both may have drug problems. They both may have criminal records. The principal reason why the unemployed white guy will probably do all right from generation to generation is the unemployed white guy has assets that he probably did not do anything to create, that goes back into the history of us not being able to accumulate assets and white people being able to accumulate assets. So the difference between the two people is not their personal earning power and their personal economic stability, is that the white guy might be living in a home that his grandparents have owned for generations. He ain't doing nothing to keep it up. It's paid for. Other relatives are paying off the taxes. And the black dude is living in public housing in a horrible community, dodging bullets, maybe throwing some bullets himself because he thinks that's the way he's got to survive. And so if we equalize the lifestyle, whether it's the worst possible lifestyle or the best possible lifestyle, the difference the gap that we're trying to fight to close is the fact that you have assets to fall back on, white person, and I don't. Right. And let me take the other extreme. And we noticed this at Black Enterprise. 2 corporate executives at the same level in a corporation, both making millions of dollars a year, both with their stock options, the whole 9. The white dude gets fired. Let's say the CEO, and they fire him. We hear, I'm gonna take a year off. I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna work for a nonprofit for $1.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go spend some time in Europe. I've never seen, I haven't spent time. What's the black dude's first thing? I got to get my next gig.
Correct.
I don't have the assets to just chill, you know, because of that same inequity. That wasn't an equity that he created. It was an equity that exists for all the reasons that we've heard today. So even if the lifestyle, today's economic lifestyle is the same, we are in peril when you know a person who's making $20 million a year is still living paycheck to paycheck because they don't have assets on the same level as their peers.
Right. So if I may jump in on that as well.
Absolutely.
So when I looked at those communities that you said, where we owned property, where we had businesses, the idea that I think has been missing in some of this conversation is what happened in transferring that to the next generation.
Yes.
So we had so much in our community, you know, that but when we didn't have enough to cover the basic taxes, but when we didn't, we can't pass on the education level to our children. We have to set them up to go to college and to school to do what we did. That's what other communities have done better than us. And I agree with you. If they've got resources to do it, you know, I take on the position to say, but how did they get, in most cases, those resources? What I've realized after working at a company that's been around for almost 200 years, that the majority of the folks that have been beneficiaries of life insurance are how they got the leg up to have wealth in this country.
That's all true, but let's take Black Wall Street, right?
Yes.
And the Tulsa Black Wall Street wasn't the only one. You got to understand
Right.
that there were Black Wall Streets all
That's
across
right.
the country because of segregation.
Green
Mm,
Avenue.
yeah.
What I want you to recognize that the reason why Black Wall Street got destroyed wasn't through no fault of black people.
Yes.
Again, white people don't do things better. What they have is a margin of error to make mistakes that we don't have.
Correct. That's right.
So all that property, for example, in Black Wall Street was insured. All of it was insured. But guess who held the policies?
The white insurance.
And they were not required to honor those policies.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is, and that's why what Reverend Jackson's doing so important, what Marc Morial's doing what these organizations are doing so important, is because the reason why Black Wall Street got destroyed is because we could not protect the assets that we have. We didn't lose all our property. A lot of us had like family that had property down south that somehow went away because somehow we didn't know how to protect it. We didn't have the legal protection to stop people from just taking the land when they wanted it, or trump up legal charges to say you're a criminal and we're gonna put you in jail, now you can't pay your taxes. In other words, we didn't lose our wealth solely because we didn't know what we were doing. We still live in a society where there's unequal protection under the law, even today,
Yes.
even though it's much better than it was for our grandparents. But for the previous generations, my grandparents, their parents, even if they built up a great store or great land, a lot of land or whatever, it could be just taken.
So Al, though, I love where you're going, and I totally agree with you. But if you bring it to today, I bought into Bed-Stuy back in 2001. And this was back when the brownstones were $300,000-$400,000. And those folks who were there and are still there have risen with the appreciation of those properties. But I've seen so many lose those properties for poor financial planning, for not doing the basics, for having cars that look outside that they're like you said, they've got lots of wealth. We're dressed every day, but we're not doing what it takes to create wealth, to keep wealth, and to sustain wealth in the way of having a proper estate plan in place. The woman to the right of me passed away, and the home, her daughter had already passed. The home went to the city for auction. Lost for our own lack of preparation. On the other side, the lady is 98, she lives with her granddaughter. You know, they've got 4 stories and not renting any of the levels there that could continue. And so they can't refinance to take money off because they've got no income stream. Just, where I'm going is that I think that's why I wrote a book, the value of black enterprise, that there's things that we can, best practices that we can teach to make sure that those things don't happen. That's where I'm going. And to your point, when I think these other communities, we've got to look at those. So we look at the people who've excelled in ours, but let's make it equal comparison to other communities and what are they doing differently, and learn best practices from them.
I think we're definitely in the same mission, which is what being Black Enterprise. I'm in my 32nd. This March 4th will be my 32nd anniversary of joining Black Enterprise. So I am not disputing that we have to teach these things. We do.
Yes.
What I'm saying to you is that in the absence of broader institutional change, let's give you an example of a book. I'm an author as well.
Yep.
Okay. The average book sells 250 copies a year. Not because the books aren't good, but because so many books are being published, nobody has time to read them all. So it's the same thing with Black Enterprise. We reach a lot of people, especially now that we're more digitally focused. We use social media. It's the digital edition of the magazine. The printed product is actually less important now than our digital and our live events. But we are even still struggling with how do we reach the person who is never going to read a book, who's not going to try to, you talking about financial planner, what? You know, and there are people who could afford a financial planner that won't see a financial planner. So what I spend most of my time focused on is mindset.
Absolutely.
Because if we don't fix the mindset, the fact that there's a Black Enterprise magazine or a website, and the fact that there's some book, because trust me, I'm a book junkie, and I want a copy of your book, of course, but I read books apart. If we could tell you just the number of financial books with secrets to wealth creation that have come across my desk in the past year.
That's right.
So the problem isn't the information's not there. The information is there. The question is, how do you get this information into the hands of the people that need it most in a form that they will digest it and use it and change the way they think about money?
Okay.
I'm the host of a new radio show it airs on WLIB at 9 o'clock p.m. right after the Gary Bird show called Be Lifted Up. It's a faith and finance gospel-driven show. Literally, I just started doing it. And we spend our time talking about how do you reach the person who doesn't trust banks, who's going to look at you and say, you ain't, I'm glad you're doing good, brother, but you ain't got nothing to do with me and my life and what I'm trying to deal with. And how do you get them on the path to and my thing is you got to start them out with something basic. That's what I'm saying. I start them out with, just don't spend all your money.
Yep.
People who don't have money ain't never going to think about investing. People who don't have savings is never going to think of why they need a financial advisor. I don't have any money to manage. What I need you for? Right. People who don't think they're going to live past tomorrow ain't thinking about buying an insurance policy. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so it's not that there's one, your answer is wrong. We need everything you're
That's right.
doing. But if we're talking about the larger closing of the wealth gap, you got two things that have to happen that's not happening enough. Getting into the mindset and the culture of Black people and money. So, so that we start thinking about money differently from the cradle to from the cradle, which doesn't happen. And two, we have to recognize that even if we do everything right, and we get all the secrets, and we should do all the things we think all the other communities are doing, if we don't have political power, if we don't change how we educate ourselves, and we don't have legal protection, anything we build can get taken away from us.
Let me throw in, just before you go, Ron. So another thing that I think has been successful for us in this is we created a movement, right? So the agents got on board that I'm a part of something bigger than myself. We enrolled families into seeing the vision that we had, that I shared, that me and my fiance here, Mecca Santana, that we have 4 children between us, right? And that at some point, we're going to set them up to be successful in their own right, have their own investments, but what they're going to inherit from us will be many millions, right? And it's not only for them, but it's for their children. And so there'll be 2 and 3 generations benefiting from this. And the idea being, and the vision being, of those 200,000 people that we touched in this program, getting them to see that them doing that for their children and their children's children will change the entire community into the future. So now we can teach, the folks how to manage that. But I don't believe we're going to touch everybody we got to get those who get it and get it right away. And then continue to show, because I think we're followers for the most part, that this is not what we're supposed to be doing, is buying the car and buying the brands and all the things that are out there, but investing in something for ourselves and being responsible and accountable for building our own families. And so just trying to create a movement and excitement.
That's all true, but I want you to understand the scale.
Yes.
So 200,000 people sounds like a lot of people.
Yep.
Until you think of that, we're 8 million people in
Right.
the population.
But that was one company and one initiative.
Well,
without the
but I
buy-in
want
and
you
the
to understand
support.
the challenge of
Right.
scale, so we can understand that it's about individual action.
Get it?
And what individual families can do.
Yep.
And us having to challenge systems.
Yes. Oh, no, totally. We have to change the system.
I did a thing about one point, we hear the number about our spending power and how much spending power we have. And I actually did a post on this. If you follow me on social media, I'll share the link. Alfred, Edmond, Jr. on any platform. about what $1.5 trillion in spending power, which is not wealth.
Right.
Spending power is not wealth, by the way.
Correct.
That's how much money you spent. It ain't much money you got left. It's turnover.
Yes.
But even if you took that number, which sounds very impressive and is equal to Russia's GDP and all of that, if you divided that among 8 million black people or whatever our population is, you know what it adds up to? Roughly $28,000. So what I'm saying is, where we hear billion and trillion,
Yes.
it's a lot of money if you're looking at it as an individual. So I'm trying to get us to understand the scale of change so that what you're doing
Right.
has to be scaled across multiple generations and multiple families of people.
Absolutely.
So you will have a vertical impact through future generations of your bloodline.
Yes.
As long as everybody sticks to the plan and keeps
That's
doing it from generation to generation. The question becomes, how do you take the Earl Gray's family, the John Johnson family, the Kathy Hughes family, because we know we can build wealth because we
Yes.
see examples. But how do you take that DNA, if you will, and make it part of the normal way that black people live and operate versus the exceptions to the rule? The reason why black enterprise can exist easily is because it's easy to pick out the exceptions to the rule. But the question becomes, how do we make that mindset a common mindset?
Yes.
You can't do that with a book. There has to be education in schools. There has to be education in churches, and that says we're going to change the way we teach how we deal with money, so that even if I never read your book,
Yes.
there's a way we do things that's going to give me the same results that your book gets. So I'm not trying to dismiss
Nope.
anything that
Yep.
you're saying. I'm
Yep.
saying I want us to get our arms around the broader institutional challenge of changing a cultural mindset about how we're thinking about money.
That's right.
And most of us have to unlearn and then relearn.
If you want an example of that cultural mindset, have any of you ever heard a man? I used to do probate planning and estate planning, and you talk to a family about trust and wills, and the husband says, "I'm not leaving no whole lot of money for nobody to spend with the next husband."
That's a
Mindset. It's a mindset issue. Let me just quote for you from a study about wealth inequality and race that says and I want you to tell me whether or not you agree with it, and then we're going to take a couple questions from the audience. Addressing racial wealth inequality will require a major redistributive effort or another major public policy intervention to build black American wealth. This could take the form of a direct race-specific initiative like a dramatic reparations program tied to compensation for the legacies of slavery and Jim Crow, and this is interesting, an initiative that addresses the perniciousness of wealth inequality for the entire American population, which could disproportionately benefit black folk due to their exceptionally low levels of wealth. Indeed, the two strategies, reparations on the one hand, or a substantial trust fund for every low-income American on the other, need not be mutually exclusive. What do you think, gentlemen?
Okay, I don't know if you got that right I did my
You did your sign. See, I gave him a syllabus, Dr. Cole, and some questions
I got it right here.
to
I got
answer,
mine.
so we wouldn't be sort of all
short-
over the place. You know, that's how women do things.
The short answer is that is absolutely on point, which I think Marc Morial said it, I think Reverend Jackson said it this morning, and I'm saying it. The wealth gap was created by public policy.
Right.
It's by law and government that said, you get all the assets and we will protect you for 250 years at least to start, and you are the asset. And then when you were no longer the asset, we still not gonna let you have any assets. And then when you finally get to have some assets, now we're telling you, you don't need any extra help because we're all equal now. And the fact that I had a 250-year head start doesn't matter. You're not gonna close the gap of that head start by, learning how to do estate planning. I mean, you're not. And so what I'm saying is, what we have to do, including what Eugene is talking about, we have to do that to survive and to be strong enough to make the policy changes. When Reverend Jackson talked about we need money to pay for this, that's why we need to build our wealth as individuals and manage money and take out insurance because when it's time to write the check, to fill out this envelope and write the check, we know that a lot of these envelopes are going to leave here empty, even though a lot of us look like we could pay. And that's my thing.
Yep.
We need to do what my man's talking about, so when it's time to write the check, we can write the check, so we can finance the political campaigns, the Rainbow Pushers, the Urban Leagues, these organizations, so they can do the work, and HBCUs, by the way, so they can do the work that they can do to deal with the systemic issue of closing this gap. But without a major public policy change that we're going to have to force, they're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, they meaning those who love the status quo, regardless of race. They're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, man, we need to fix this. We need to have a Marshall Plan, and we need to do reparations, and I'm going to go up to President Trump, and we're going to make this happen. That's not going to happen without us forcing it.
Right.
But if we're broke all the time, we can't even get to the position of financing those who are meant to fight our battles to force the issue.
That's where I
Eugene?
would go as well. And
That's where
the-
you-
No. And well, I think the two sides, because I still take an onus back on ourselves. So we have to fight and push for others on the external to give us and make true to what has been owed from years past. But waiting
And
for that,
president.
sitting there and waiting for that, and I think we have to create our own baby bonds today. That a life insurance policy for my son. That is $1 million of a baby bond that I don't need somebody else to give to me. That's tax-free, created, that is in my control, in my realm of possibility to do. And I think we have to teach that to others about what we can do. It's not that we don't have money. It's what we have 28,000, as you said. It's what we do with it. But we've got the best apps, the newest phones. Can we redirect some of what we have? Back to things
we
that
must redirect.
Yes.
It's not can.
That's
we
right.
must.
We must redirect what we have back to facilitate for ourselves as well, and like you said, to fund the fight up the line.
This reminds me of a debate that occurred about 125 years ago. W.E.B. and Booker T. Shall we pursue political power,
That's right.
or shall we pursue economic power? And what these two brilliant gentlemen have demonstrated for us today is that we got to walk and chew chewing gum at the same time.
Exactly.
We have to do
We have to
both.
stop thinking
So
either
give them
or.
both a round of applause for demonstrating what we know is true. And anybody who wants, I think we're at 1 o'clock, but if you want to stay for a little Q&A, and if you are willing, why don't we take a couple of questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Come grab this microphone.
Okay, I just wanted to get back to the education piece,
Yes.
because again, the mindset is critically important for us. Give me some sense of how we could educate our people who have totally different sets of what they believe in. You have the hip hop generation that's believing something totally different about how to get money, and then you have a generation, you have the baby boomers and who have money to pass on, but maybe don't have the education to know exactly how to do that. And then the other thing is, just because you have those assets doesn't mean that you'll be able to pass them on, because the institutions that are supposed to allow you to do that, they change the game. I guarantee you, if all of a sudden 2 million black people bought 500,000 policies, they'd change the rules and make it taxable. I guarantee you.
Right. Gotcha.
Let me just relay one. That's why that vote is so important, though. They really go
That's right.
hand in
There you
hand,
go.
because the
That's-
rules of the road are established by politics.
By politics.
At the National Council of Negro Women, we came up with something we call Millennial Entrepreneurs. And we aim a monthly webinar series straight at the hip-hop crowd with quotes like, secure the bag, and stuff I don't even understand. We do it for the gram. All kinds of slang language that I don't understand, but they understand, because 200 or 300 of them sign up at a time to get this financial information. So you got to go where our people are. Is there another question?
If I
Or
may,
comment?
brother, so I did write them down, and it starts from personal. I think a lot of things that we've been missing, and we talked about how we've been made to feel inferior. We've been, I was writing down Dr. Cole's struggling to identify with ourselves and who we are. We don't know our own value and our own worth today. We buy brands to make us look good. We're not shown in a way to understand our own value. I told you the story that 2 years at New York Life, I got promoted to an assistant vice president. And I got a letter in the interoffice mail that said they wanted to take out a $2.5 million policy on my life to benefit the retirement fund of New York Life. And I said, I don't understand, what is this about? And they said, well, this is common practice. You might have heard it in small businesses. They call it key man
Key man
policies,
life insurance,
right?
yeah.
Big companies do it as well. This is how they offset their retirement and what they're going to pay you. They set up themselves in that way. So I said, I get that. But tell me where this $2.5 million came from. And they said, well, that's what the company values you at. I said, I don't get it. They said, that's what they say that you're worth for the work that you do here. I said, explain it to me. And they said, there's different ways to calculate your value and your worth. Here's a simple way. Here you are, 30 years old, making $100,000 a year. We expect you to work here another 25 years, at least till you're 55. What's $100,000 a year for 25 years? $2.5 million. Without raises, without bonuses, without promotions, that's just what we see at your basic place right now of what you're worth. And so they said, well, don't you have a $2.5 million policy on yourself? To which I said, no.
Not yet.
Right. And they said, well, why not? Don't you realize that that's an income stream that you will earn? That is what you're worth for the work that you do, that if you don't make it home, your family won't receive. Right? And the more I started to think about that, and where I'm going with it is your point of mindset. Because when I didn't think that I had anything but student loans, a big mortgage, a car that was old because I didn't want to buy a new car to get a new payment, they made me realize that and thought of me and valued me more than I valued myself. So once I started to realize how much
old were
I
you
worth,
when you got that lesson, though?
30 years old.
So this is
So
my
hold on one
point.
sec. So then I realized, if I had $1 million car, what would I do with it? I would insure it. I would protect it. I would make sure it was taken care of. If I had $1 million house, I would do that. Anything, a $1 million racehorse, I wouldn't have it staying up late nights, drinking and eating fried food, not exercising. Any other $1 million asset I would take care of, but I wasn't doing that for myself because I didn't realize and see myself that way. I think a big part of where we have to start in this building block in creating wealth is understanding what we are worth. The slave owner knew what we were worth.
And
He insured us
But
for
the-
the work that we do, what we produce. He protected
But the reason I asked you how old you were, you got that lesson,
Yes, sir.
because I learned a similar lesson.
Okay.
When I realized I could afford to buy a house when I was 20, but I didn't buy it until I was nearly 40. Again, when I get to talk about mindset, so when the question about education, when I'm talking about education, is what are you teaching your kid from birth
There you go.
about money and how it works? All right. There's a great book called Money Management from A to Z, from grade school to grad school by Ernest Barris Jr. Again, I'll share these links on social media so people can find them. But when I'm talking about education, I'm talking about what do we teach the kid from the cradle, so that you're not waiting until you're 30 years old and you realize, what, I should have insurance. Because to me, the disparity between whites and blacks, if we want to use those broad terms, is not that they have some secret that we don't have, is that things that they've been thinking about from elementary school, it didn't hit us until we were in college or out of college. And then all that lost time, we're trying to make up for it. So what I'm saying is that we should, for example, I require all the people I mentioned to read at least one book about money and finance every month. My kids knew more about money at age 11 than I did when I was, 31. So that's when I talk about educating. We have to start earlier, so that by the time you get to 20, they already know to buy life insurance. They're not thinking about. They just think that's the way it is, and that's what we got to do. So that's churches.
Yes.
What are churches teaching in Sunday school besides the scripture? How they tying the scripture to how you manage money.
Correct.
For kids, for little kids.
That's right.
Because by the time you're 40, it's not that it's too late, but you're playing catch up.
That's right.
And we got to stop playing catch up. We got to start raising a generation of kids that can say billion without stuttering. They think it's natural.